Have you ever wondered why two neighboring countries, Russia and Ukraine, are locked in a devastating war that has captured the world's attention? You see the headlines, you see the heart-wrenching images, but the why can feel incredibly complex. What really started this conflict? What will it take to finally bring peace? And how can we prevent such tragedies in the future? Stick with me, because today we're going to break down these crucial questions in a way that makes sense. To truly understand what's happening now, we have to rewind the clock. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine is deeply intertwined, stretching back over 1,000 years to a shared origin in a medieval state called Kievan Rus. For centuries, much of what is now Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, and later, the Soviet Union. This long history created deep cultural, linguistic, and family ties, but it also fostered a strong Ukrainian desire for independence and a distinct national identity. This came to a head in 1991, when, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine declared its independence. This was a monumental moment. For the first time in generations, Ukraine was a sovereign nation, free to choose its own path. Russia, under President Boris Yeltsin, was one of the first countries to recognize it. It seemed like a new era of neighborly respect was beginning. However, things began to get complicated. One of the biggest points of friction has been NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is a military alliance originally formed after World War II to counter the Soviet Union. After the Soviet collapse, many former Eastern Bloc countries like Poland and the Baltic states joined NATO. From their perspective, it was a security guarantee, a way to protect their newfound independence. But from Russia's point of view, it looked like a hostile alliance expanding right up to its borders. Russian leaders, including Vladimir Putin, have repeatedly called NATO expansion a direct threat to their country's security interests. For Ukraine, the desire to join Western institutions like the European Union and NATO grew stronger over the years. Many Ukrainians saw this as a path toward democracy, economic prosperity, and a definitive break from Russia's sphere of influence. This tension between leaning west and staying aligned with Russia became a major fault line in Ukrainian politics. It exploded in 2014. At the time, Ukraine's pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych unexpectedly backed out of a major trade agreement with the European Union, favoring closer ties with Russia instead. This sparked massive protests in Kiev's central square, the Maidan. The protests, known as the Revolution of Dignity, led to Yanukovych fleeing the country. Russia viewed this as a Western-backed coup that illegally overthrew a legitimate, friendly government. In response, it moved swiftly. In early 2014, Russian forces in unmarked uniforms took control of the Crimean Peninsula in southern Ukraine, a region with a majority ethnic Russian population and home to a major Russian naval base. A hastily organized referendum was held, and Russia formally annexed Crimea. The international community overwhelmingly condemned this as a violation of international law. Almost simultaneously, a conflict erupted in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Pro-Russian separatists, which Ukraine and Western governments say were backed, armed, and even led by Russia, declared independent republics. This sparked a grinding war that, between 2014 and early 2022, had already claimed over 14,000 lives. So that brings us to the full-scale invasion that began on February 24, 2022. What was the final trigger? In the days leading up to it, President Putin gave a series of speeches laying out his justifications. He claimed his goal was the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, framing the Ukrainian government as a hostile regime. He also spoke of protecting Russian speakers and formally recognized the independence of the separatist regions in Donbas. He essentially denied Ukraine's right to exist as a fully independent, sovereign nation, portraying it as an artificial creation of the Soviet era that historically belonged to Russia. From Ukraine's and most of the world's perspective, this was a baseless pretext for a war of aggression, a brutal attempt to conquer a democratic neighbor and crush its right to self-determination. Now, what will it take to stop this war? This is the million-dollar question, and the answer is incredibly difficult. From Ukraine's standpoint, peace is not possible without the complete withdrawal of Russian troops from all of its internationally recognized territory, including Crimea and the Donbas. For them, anything less would mean accepting the loss of their land and sovereignty. They are fighting for their very existence as a nation. From Russia's perspective, they've stated they need their security concerns addressed, which includes a neutral Ukraine that will not join NATO. They also now claim the annexed territories as part of Russia, a position that is a non-starter for Ukraine and the international community. This fundamental disagreement over territory and sovereignty is the core reason the conflict is so hard to resolve. True, lasting peace would likely require immense diplomatic effort, security guarantees for both sides, and a resolution to the status of the occupied territories that both can somehow accept. Right now, that seems a very long way off. So what are other countries doing? The response has been massive. The United States, the European Union, the UK, and many others have imposed sweeping economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its banks, industries, and wealthy elites. The goal is to cripple Russia's ability to fund the war. They have also provided Ukraine with enormous amounts of financial aid and, crucially, advanced military equipment. This support has been vital in helping Ukraine defend itself against a much larger military. On the other hand, countries like China and India have taken a more neutral stance, calling for peace but refraining from condemning Russia or joining in sanctions, prioritizing their own economic and strategic relationships. This has created a complex global dynamic, with a clear divide in how the world is responding. International bodies like the United Nations have condemned the invasion, but their power is limited, especially when a permanent Security Council member, Russia, can veto any binding action. Finally, and this is perhaps the most important question for our shared future, how do we stop wars like this before they even begin? There's no magic wand, but there are principles. Strengthening international law and institutions is key. When a country can violate another's sovereignty with few immediate consequences, it encourages further aggression. Promoting diplomacy and open channels of communication, even between adversaries, is vital. When dialogue breaks down, the risk of miscalculation and conflict skyrockets. Fostering economic interdependence can also raise the cost of war for everyone involved, making it a less attractive option. And perhaps most fundamentally, it's about education and mutual respect. Understanding different histories and perspectives, and championing the core principle that a nation's people have the right to choose their own destiny without fear of invasion. These are not easy solutions, but they are the pathways we must pursue to build a more peaceful world. The lessons from this devastating conflict must not be forgotten. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredibly important and complex topic. It's not easy to talk about, but understanding is the first step. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the events shaping our world. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.